Morning, everybody. Hope you're doing well this morning. I thought it was a nice day here, so we would take a trip to London. Oh, there we go. Front of the Tower Bridge there. If you've never been, that's the Tower Bridge. Looks like there's a lot of activity there. Okay, hope you're hanging in there, folks. You know, it's kind of a still kind of a scary time with you know, the Delta variant and all that sort of stuff. But hopefully you're all vaccinated and your family's all vaccinated and you're doing okay. As it stands now, I think the university is still planning on having at least some of its classes in person. Well, hopefully that will continue, because certainly the faculty miss seeing the students in person. I'm sure you folks miss classes in person and seeing other students in person as well. So we'll keep our fingers crossed. We're still hoping that it's going to be a fairly normal fall. And hopefully you're able to have some fun this summer, even if it is a little bit restricted. Okay, so yes, you do. Speaking of fun, I can't think of anything more fun than having a midterm exam, which will be at the end of next week. But I thought I'd take a few seconds to talk about the midterm exam and how it will be administered. You know, we're doing this as, I guess, as calmly as possible. We don't want to give you any more stress than you already have in your lives right now. So it's going to be an online exam that you can take at any time in a 3-day period. And it will be open book. And let's go ahead and put some of this information up. All right. Let's do this. Okay. Hopefully you can see that okay. And as you can see, the test will be available for you to take starting Friday at 12 a.m. So, you know, at 12 a.m. between Thursday and Friday, it will be turned on. And at that point, you can take it anytime you want until Sunday at midnight. Okay, so if you want to study for the weekend, over the weekend, you can take it at the very last 80-minute period before midnight. I would suggest doing it a little bit earlier than that, just to make sure that you're wide awake and everything, but it will be available for you all day Friday, Saturday, and Sunday to take. You'll be given 80 minutes for the exam. It's 60 questions, more or less, multiple choice questions, and you know exactly what those questions are going to be like, because I've been giving you questions. Probably you'll end up with, out of the 60 questions, somewhere around 15 or something like that questions that you already have. So that helps a lot. It is open book. You can use the book itself. You can use your slides. You can use the videos, although I don't think that using the videos is going to be very time effective. And let me say this, I think you folks know this because you've had online classes for so long and probably have had online and open book tests, that despite how easy that sounds, you know, you do need to study. There is no way that you'll be able to pass the exam without having done any studying. Even though, you know, you will have all the material available to you, there's just too many questions for you to learn the material from scratch while you're taking the test. So it is important you study and you know what to study. It covers all the lecture material through next Thursday, more or less. We're going to be covering everything through taste perception, and it could be that on Thursday we will actually move into touch perception. We'll be able to finish taste and move into touch perception, in which case that material will be on the final exam. But certainly some of the material presented on Thursday will be on the midterm exam. Okay, so everything through taste perception from the lecture material. I think Dylan will be covering taste, I believe, on Monday. Which means that all the discussion section material through Monday's discussion, that's the 9th, I believe, that will be on the midterm as well. And then you will have a discussion on Wednesday. However, he'll be presenting material on there that will be covered on the final exam. Although, as it says there at the bottom, he will allow part of Wednesday's discussion section to be used for a little review. Now, the way we do reviews is that we are there, he'll be there to answer questions. He's not going to go through the material from the beginning of the course. He just, we don't have time for that. There's just too much material to present. So he needs to use that discussion section to present new material, but I've told him to leave 10, 15 minutes to answer questions for you. So there, probably at the end of that Wednesday discussion section next week, he'll be there to answer questions. So please look through your notes before that Wednesday's discussion section, so you come in with questions. Okay, as I said, he's not going to do a comprehensive review by any means. We just don't have the time for that, but he will have 15 minutes or so to answer your questions. So it's important you come in with questions. If you don't have questions, he'll just end the discussion section. So please do come in with questions for next Wednesday's section. The book material, of course, will be everything through chapter 5, which is on taste perception, including the preface. Sometimes people forget to read the preface of the book. There's at least 1 or 2 questions on the exam that will be derived right from that preface section. So make sure you go through that as well. And we do, of course, ask questions from the book that were not covered either on the lecture or the discussion section. Probably about 5 questions or something like that that are derived right from the book that are not, again, covered on either the discussion section or the lectures. So it's important that you read through the book as well. Okay, so again, it should be very straightforward, open book. You'll have at least I don't know, 1/5 of the questions already because of your practice questions. People have generally done very well when we've presented the tests like this. They don't find it too stressful, and that's what we're after. It's a summer course, and at the summer course during quarantine, we want you to enjoy the course, learn the material, and not be too stressed. But of course, you do need to be evaluated to make sure you are learning the material. So this is how we're doing it. So let me stop there and see if there's any questions. I will, of course, go over this again on Tuesday and I guess Thursday, but I wanted to see, since this is the first time I am presenting the way the test works, if there are any questions you have on the first test. Not for the material yet, that you can save, but anything about how we're going to be doing this, anything at all. Any questions? You can put in the chat or you can speak up, whatever you prefer. It's a little small class again today. That's all right. I don't mind just talking to myself. No, that's okay. You'll probably have questions next week. You'll have questions for Dylan, I'm sure. That's okay. Just want you to be prepared. It's a little bit more than a week away. So, I can understand that your mind might not be there. Instead, it's in London, like mine is right now. Okay. Any other questions on the course at all? Anything else going on? You all seem pretty happy because you have happy pictures on your little icons for Zoom, I guess. All right. Then let's go ahead and continue our lectures. So we will share our screen again. Share sound because this is music perception, and continue. Oops. Oh my gosh. Hold on a second. I just noticed a little problem. Let me try this again. Hopefully this is not a problem. Share screen, share sound, share PowerPoint. Okay. Oh boy. To share your computer audio, please install the Zoom audio device. What the heck? I've never gotten this before. Okay. Hold on just a second. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if this. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. I don't know what's going on right now. Hold on. Let's see. Hold on. Just let me check a couple of things here. Sorry about this. I have never gotten this error message before. I just want to make sure everybody's happy. Audio, testing 1, 2. That looks good. Good. It looks like it's going to be okay. Let's try it one more time. Share sound. Share. Oh gosh. Okay. I don't know what's going on here. Okay. Just let me know, folks, maybe in chat, can you see the screen fine?
We can see it fine.
You can see it fine, and you can hear me fine. My concern is because I keep getting this error message, you might not be able to hear the music. Let's see if that is in fact the case. Can you hear this piece, this crazy piece of music? Can you hear this? Could you hear that okay? No?
Yeah, we can hear it.
Oh, good, 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 good. I mean, you heard it as if it was coming not through the microphone, as if it were coming through the computer, okay? Yeah? Okay, I'll assume that's yes. If I've got a few other pieces of music to play today. If in fact you can't hear it, let me know, and I'll use the microphone to, because I do have it coming out of my computer. But you know, this is important, of course, because we're doing music. Okay, so what we were talking about with music is that we had moved from talking about what is sometimes called music's surface structure, which is, you know, the notes and the intervals between the notes and the rhythm, things like that, to the deeper aspects of music. So this is the thing like themes and variations on the themes, and things like knowing the you know, the key of the piece, as well as the, oh gosh, what is going on here? This is not a good technical day. All right. Yeah, the resolutions. And then we talked about this fact that we can even determine themes, how themes go with the original variations on those themes, even in crazy type of music that I just played you some of, that kind of atonal, or what's called 12-tone music, which is something we, you know, sounds very strange to us, and you know, maybe we have mixed feelings about that, and maybe it's not the sort of music we would listen to in the car, right? Here, let me play a little bit more of it. Right, we were used to listening to this during scary movies or science fiction movies or that sort of thing. And it does seem kind of random to us, almost as if somebody, you know, were playing random notes on the violin and that sort of thing. But as it turns out, it does have these rules, very real rules. They're kind of odd rules, right? We talked about that one of the rules is that you can create a variation in atonal music by actually playing the notes backwards from the theme, or taking the theme's notes and kind of inverting them on the musical notation staff. And that is considered a legitimate way of creating a variation on a theme for this kind of crazy atonal music. But even though we don't have any experience, very much experience listening to that type of music and you know, listening to it in any sort of regular fashion, our brain seems to be able to detect the variations in that context as well. And I didn't know that until I started writing the book, and I was really, really amazed that that is actually something that we can pick up on. It's like when the brain's listening to music, despite our musical background, despite whether we have you know, any formal musical education, it seems that our brains can pick up, you know, kind of these pieces of themes, and know how different parts of a musical piece kind of work together, even for a very new type of music, a type of music that we don't listen to very often at all, this atonal music. Of course, music works so well for us. You know, we are avid listeners of music because music can help us in some ways, I guess, experience emotions by listening, and have influences on our emotion. You know, we listen to music in the car because, you know, we want to reminisce, or we want to sing along and feel the energy of what it's like to sing along and all that sort of thing. Music can make us happy, it can make us nostalgic, all those different sorts of things. And there, regardless of our musical background, we really, really have some skill. Our brain is absolutely ready to use music for the purposes of emotion. And we can categorize the emotional quality of a piece in as soon as it starts. Based on 1 second of a song, we can know whether the piece is largely going to be conveying sadness or happiness, or something more complex. As I said, nostalgia, maybe anger, maybe jealousy, right? I'm sure you can all think of songs now, even without lyrics, right? Even if you're first listening to the beginning of a song, it's just the introduction, and maybe there'll be lyrics in a couple of seconds, but even before then, you have a sense about the emotional connotations of that song. It's something almost reflexive in how our auditory brains seem to categorize music. So I got a couple of pieces here. Hopefully you can hear this, and let me know if you can't. I'll hold the microphone closer. It's a pretty famous piece that's been used many times in movies because it is so emotionally connotative. But I mean, I'm just assuming that you folks can hear that. If not, I can play it again and hold the microphone. It's a piece of music that clearly is conveying something, I guess, more on the sad end of the continuum. I mean, what would you could call it sad, certainly, and you probably could tell it was conveying sadness pretty quickly. But as you listen to it further, maybe there's, I don't know, other complex emotions mixed in with that sadness. Let's continue to listen a little bit. I when I listen to this, I feel certainly sadness, but maybe I feel remorse. Maybe I feel I don't know, what other sort of feelings do you have when you're maybe kind of like a sadness that one comes to terms with, or one is working to come to terms with. I mean, it can get very complex and very deep, and that's the sort of thing our brains are so good at doing with music, regardless of any sort of background that we've had in learning instruments and all that sort of thing. Let's see, I think I have another piece here that I think conveys a different emotion, as I remember. Okay. It's also in a minor key, but is this a different type of emotion? And it's a type of emotion that clearly is more active than the first piece, right? It's also maybe more on the sad end of the spectrum, right? But I don't know, maybe there's maybe this is conveying some type of challenge, or some type of, I don't know, some type of situation that needs to be overcome, or something like that. And this is the stuff that I find so interesting. We go through this psychology music class. We spend a lot of time talking about the kind of emotional connotations of music and how it works, and whether it's something that is whether the characteristics that convey these emotional dimensions are similar across different musical cultures, whether they work for children the same way they work for adults. What is it in the music that kind of conveys these different emotions? And then we go beyond emotions. We also talk about actions and things like that. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in just a second. But let's stick here with just the kind of very base emotions. So what is it in the music that conveys sadness and happiness? Just to kind of make very kind of broad categories. And one thing we know about Western music is this major and minor kind of distinction. So we played this a few times, when we were talking about, Kumbaya. It's kind of a relaxed, easy sort of sound. I say happy, kind of satisfied, kind of, I don't know. I don't know how else would you describe that. Maybe I guess relax is the best word, but it's positive, right? You feel comfortable, maybe comfort. Versus where that's a little bit more longing, that's a little bit more maybe a melancholy sound. And the tonality between these two, we call this tonality, is major versus minor. And I think pretty much anybody, regardless of the musical background, could say, if you hear this type of harmony, this type of tonality, that's more happy than this. And that's just, by the way, a one-note difference. It's that major versus minor third we talked about before. So versus, I think you hear this right away, right? I think all of us can hear the difference. And that is something that is very, very common, at least in Western music, for conveying positive versus negative emotion. Now, the great thing about harmonies is that it can get very complex. So here's that kind of sad tonality or sad harmony again, right? And I'm just changing it. This is going to be sad, but it's going to be something a little bit different than just straight sadness. Maybe it's a kind of a more sophisticated sadness. Maybe it's a sadness that I don't know, is something that could be mastered, or I don't know, maybe try other words I could use. Yeah, or maybe there's something kind of missing that's causing the sadness. Versus, let's change things in the major or happy tonality. And now I'm going to change it a tiny bit to make it a happiness, but a different type of happiness. Right? So it's still major, it's still happy, but it's different from this. I don't know, what is that? That's kind of, again, a comfort, an easiness, a relaxation, right? And so just changing these notes a tiny bit can do a really nice job conveying emotions, to make our sad and happy emotions just that much more sophisticated. And of course, it gets more sophisticated from there. And yes, this does have to do with our experience with listening to music, right? We do know that there are certain types of sounds that are often associated with something positive in, say, a movie scene or a TV scene or something like that. So we do have those associations. But there are other things that probably are more maybe fundamental. So here's what we want to know. This major and minor tonality thing is probably culturally specific, meaning this. Okay, major and minor chords, major and minor intervals convey happiness and sadness in Western music. There's not a lot of evidence it does the same thing in non-Western music, like Indian ragas or something like that. So that is something, when I talk about major minor tonality being a Western music thing, I'm also talking about like popular Western music, like you might hear on the radio. I'm talking about jazz generally. That's how those things are used. However, music across all cultures also have other sorts of dimensions that are common that can convey sadness and happiness. For example, sad music often is conveyed slower, okay, than happy music. Sad music also has a pitch range. What I mean by pitch range is how high the melody goes, how low the melody goes. For sad music, that's a little bit more truncated. That's a little bit more restricted. Okay, and so that seems to be something that's culturally universal. Why would that be the case? Why would Indian ragas conveying negative, sad emotions have a slower rate, as well as all the Western music that we're more familiar with, and also have a kind of reduced pitch range, meaning that it doesn't go really high in the melody and really low in the melody, and it generally stays within a couple of notes to convey sadness? Okay, so why is that universal? why is slow music slower? I'm sorry, why is sad music slower and have a pitch range which is more constricted? And at least one theory is this, that what sad music does is kind of replicate what sad voices do. So if I'm going to get excited about something, so yeah, we're going to have a big party at my house on Saturday. I'm very excited about this big birthday party. Hopefully, you know, people will feel safe. We're going to all be outside. We can't wait. It's going to be great. There'll be music. We'll be jamming. We'll be having a good time. And when I talk about that, I kind of talk about it faster. I talk about it with, sometimes talking about, sometimes using higher pitches and lower pitches. Versus, when I talk about the fact that we are still going to have restrictions because of, what's going on with COVID, I start slowing down my speech and I start using a more restricted pitch range. So this culturally universal set of dimensions of fast music being faster, happy music being faster, happy music having a greater pitch range versus sad music being slower, sad music having a more restricted pitch range. The fact that's universal might have to do with it kind of getting its cues from how we emote through our voices. When we're sad, we talk slower. We talk with, I guess, more monotone. We talk with a restricted pitch range. But when we're happy and excited and looking forward to something, we talk faster. We talk with a more, kind of broad pitch range. Okay. That's how it might, in fact, be a cultural universality, unlike the major and minor tonality. Okay, cool. There is some chat here, I noticed. Oh, people are having a bit of an issue. Ivy, you're having an issue with not being able to hear?
It was just going in and out for a little bit, but it's fine now.
The music? Or me?
Yeah, just the last few, not you, just the last few samples you played were going in and out for me. I don't know if it's my issue though.
Yeah, that's okay. Let's try, we're going to play another piece of music. And you can tell me if you can hear. And this one's actually really important for you to hear some of the details of. So if it's not working, please let me know right away. And I could put my microphone by the speakers. I'm just a little worried that it might not be synchronized with what's coming through the computer. All right. It's the idea of this. It's the idea of musical metaphor. So this kind of goes beyond just emotion. So the idea here is that music can convey things that are in the world, actions that occur, like fight scenes, that sort of thing, like scary music, like all these sorts of things that might have emotional connotations, but go beyond just emotion and convey things that are happening, right? And there's a wonderful demonstration of this in a piece of music you may have heard when you were a kid called Peter and the Wolf by Tchaikovsky. Here, I'll put this up, Peter and the Wolf. And it really is it's written for children, but it is a great way to understand how classical composers can use music to convey not just emotions, but to convey things like animals and the way animals move and the way animals can threaten. Okay, so let's listen to this, and hopefully this is coming through. Don't know what's going on. If you can't hear this, chat right away, and I'll bring the microphone over to my speakers. Oops, shoot, sorry.
My dear children, each character of this tale is represented by a corresponding instrument in the orchestra. The bird by a flute. The duck by a oboe. a low register. The grandfather by the bassoon. The wolf I read on. Peter by the string of X.
Okay, I'm assuming you could all hear that. I didn't see anything pop up on chat, so hopefully you heard it well enough to follow what I'm going to be talking about here. And you get the idea, right? So each of these different animals that are going to be part of this story, it's a whole story about how a boy is able to trap a wolf and with his animal friends and all this sort of stuff. The animals are represented by instruments that are really nicely suited to represent those animals. But it goes beyond just the sounds of those animals. So at first you hear the flute representing birds, and yes, flutes sound like birds, right? And then I think the duck is next, where an oboe kind of sounds like a duck quack, but it gets a little bit more sophisticated than that. So when you heard the cat, and I think that's, what is that, a clarinet or something like that, is representing it, and maybe a clarinet kind of sounds like a meow, but more than that, it really kind of represents the way a cat moves, the way the notes of the clarinet, the melody of the clarinet that's representing the cat is kind of almost like stalking. It's kind of like, you know, kind of the way a cat kind of slowly moves and walks. It does a wonderful job with that, and then the grandpa too, right? So you know, it's I think that it's a bassoon or something like that, and it's in a lower register, and grandfathers maybe have deeper voices, whatever. But it was kind of like this, you know, kind of a slow moving kind of, kind of lumbering sort of melody that represented the movement. And then, of course, the wolf is menacing, right? The Peter, the boy, it's kind of, kind of lilting. It's the melody is lilting. It's like a skipping of the boy, kind of a happy, carefree boy. It just does a wonderful job of demonstrating how not just the sounds of the instruments can, be like the sounds of the animals, but the melodies, the rhythm, that sort of thing can represent the movement of these animals, and maybe maybe some of the motivation or some of the I don't know, dispositions of the animals. That cat melody to me sounded a little sneaky. It sounded a little, kind of a little coy, that sort of thing. And it just does a wonderful job with that. And I think one of the things that music does, regardless if we're talking about classical music or music you're listening to, on your earbuds on the way, to the class today, on the way to class, before class started, or when you're in your car or something like that. I think music might always be conveying metaphor, whether it's, anger, sometimes it's going to be very emotional, of course, anger and jealousy, or kind of comfort of love or something like that. Even if it's not as overt as we just heard in those examples. So your brain is always kind of listening to music to kind of look for emotional and other types of metaphor having to do with action, having to do with I don't know, different types of interactions with people, maybe different types of emotional voices or something like that. Let me give you another example. This is something, of course, I discussed in the book, but Somewhere Over the Rainbow, our favorite song of the last few days. It is the most popular song in the world, supposedly. So it's a good one to use. But those first two notes, which you've learned, are the octave, right? It's the bottom note to the top note of the scale, right? Right? And that first interval, so that's somewhere over the rainbow, you know, right? That first interval is pretty much the largest interval you'll go in a scale. And it in some ways represents something emotional like longing. Oops. Right? You can imagine Dorothy kind of looking out her window and staring off into the distance and singing this somewhere over the rainbow. It also represents, in a way, the rainbow, right? That's the expanse of the rainbow is actually being represented in the expanse of that interval, that octave interval. Right? And that's one of the reasons I think the song it works so well, right? It's wonderful at conveying longing, which of course is the emotional point of the song, and it's wonderful at conveying the symbol of longing that's, you know, making up the lyric, which is a rainbow, because of that you know, large musical interval that we call an octave. And again, I think what's going on is that music is always doing this type of thing, regardless of the musical style. And our brain is always looking for it. And again, that happens regardless of your background. You didn't know what an octave was. Maybe many of you didn't know what an octave was until Tuesday's class. But that doesn't matter. Your brain was always using, you know, kind of its sensitivity to these intervals, without knowing the names, to dig into this deep kind of metaphorical structure in music. It does it all the time, and I think that's why music is one of the reasons music is such a you know, important part of our lives. Right? It goes beyond what we can describe in words very often. Right? Anyway, kind of just to wrap this discussion up, I wanted to introduce you to somebody who sadly has passed on since I wrote the book. And his name is Bob Mitchell. You're seeing him there on the bottom right. He was quite old when I interviewed him. He was in his 80s, and he's since passed, but a wonderful guy. And he was the last of the silent film organists. So maybe you know a little bit, if you're you know, historian, film history buff, you might know that when films first came out, black and white, of course, they didn't have sound, right? They had, you know, kind of like subtitles that would come in between scenes. You know, they didn't actually superimpose the subtitles on the actual, you know, images. You know, you'd see a scene of somebody doing something, and maybe you see their face talking silently, and then you see a card come up, right? So you've probably seen these sorts of things, you know, somewhere in your travels. But you know, it was a weird thing to watch things silently. And so what they did before they figured out how to add soundtracks to film is they would bring in musicians, and most usually it was somebody who played the organ, and they would watch the film along with the audience and compose pretty much on the spot how to accompany the action in the film. And I actually saw, you know, I interviewed him. It was really, really useful, insightful about how he chose different types of musical sounds to depict different types of things. And then I had a chance to see him perform. They were showing a silent movie in a, where was it? Somewhere, I think Arcadia or something like that. We drove up with my family. You know, just to kind of get us, you know, kind of, you know, get a sense of what old movies were like. It was kind of a novelty thing. And so we drove up there, and they were showing a pirate movie, old pirate movie from the 20s. And there was Bob in front of his big, you know, big kind of organ setup. You know, it's like a lot of buttons, but it's an old wooden organ, you know, kind of the ones that you would see in an old church or something like that. And he was facing the screen as we were, and he was playing music along with the scenes. And, you know, you could see that he was using musical metaphor on his kind of spontaneous compositions all the time. Now you folks have some sophistication. Actually, I think that this is something that's interesting about your generation. I think you guys really do listen to movie music more carefully than my generation ever did. And some of that's because there's so many wonderful movie composers, right? Zimmerman and of course John Williams and all these folks. And some of this is beautiful music to listen to without watching the movie. So you're probably very aware of this sort of thing. But what Bob Mitchell and these folks used to have to do in the 20s before sound movies is kind of do spontaneous composition as they watched the movies. And I had talked to him about this. He said, yeah, no, we were never given music. It was always improvised. And we'd often get new movies every few days. So we'd have to improvise a new score every time a new movie came in. And so, during the action scenes, he'd be, playing very quickly. During the romantic scenes, things would be kind of slower and more, kind of expansive on the keyboard. You get this sort of idea. I mean, it was perfect. I mean, it was almost like a reflexive thing with him. He could do it wonderfully without a problem. And he was just very, very in touch with, the power of music to convey metaphorically what's going on. And perceptually, people are very good at this. I mean, you probably wouldn't be surprised, given your sophistication with movie music, that if you bring subjects into a laboratory and show them a couple of scenes from a movie, and then just silent, and then have passages from the soundtrack from those scenes that are kind of mixed up, and people are asked to match which music goes with which scene. Of course, this is a movie they haven't seen before, right? People are outstanding at this, absolutely outstanding with this. So you would match the kind of jumpy, kind of more rhythmic music with an action scene, like Bob Mitchell is composing. For the romantic scene, it's this more kind of slow, kind of softer, kind of, more major tonality sort of music. And people are very good at making these matches. And of course, as we've been discussing, this is not musical experts. These are people that are not composing music for movies that are in these experiments. These are musical novices. These are people who've, never had any formal musical training, but boy, it's something they can do so consistently and so readily. I mean, it's not like they need to think about this. You say, oh yeah, this one goes with this scene, this one goes with this scene. They in a lot of these experiments, they'd be nearly perfect at doing these matches. And yes, it is because we have experience watching movies and knowing how the music has matched in the past as we watch movies. But what I'm suggesting is there's probably something deeper, that the music is being composed to kind of capture certain types of actions, certain types of emotions. And it's not like these things are arbitrarily kind of matched together. During a chase scene, the music might, if it's a running chase scene, the music might in fact convey the running footsteps, because there's a lot of kind of very rhythmic kind of very kind of clear sort of beat to it, where during a more relaxed love scene or something like that, you're not going to have that kind of very conspicuous rhythmicity to it. People are terrific at this. Okay, one more slide on music, and I think you'll find this interesting, about infants in music. And it seems that we have a sensitivity to music at a very, very young age. And you see one of these baby experiments. This is an old baby experiment, because I can tell from the headphones, but you can test baby sensitivity to music by testing their alertness, their attention. And often that's done through recording their pacifier sucking. Okay, so that's what you're seeing there. That's a pacifier that can record how quickly the infant is sucking on the pacifier. And the idea here is the faster they suck, the more attentive they are to what's going on. Now, looks like pretty much a newborn baby here with the headphones on. And some of these experiments I'll be talking about are like this. There is pretty strong evidence now that that you actually, when you were in your mom's womb, you could hear music to some degree through the womb. So these are experiments now where the baby is, still in the womb, and little loudspeakers are put on the mom's belly. Sounds really silly, but I guess it works. And music is played through. It's a very, kind of simple, maybe it's almost a nursery rhyme or something like that is played through, I think during the third trimester, and they do it maybe every other day or something like that. And then when the baby comes out, they test whether the baby has kind of a heightened sensitivity to that song, right? And in fact, they do. Okay, so people come playing what song should we play? Smoke on the Water, okay, to the belly. The baby comes out, and then you play it a bunch of songs with its little headphones on there, and you record it sucking. And boy, when Smoke on the Water comes on, that baby's gonna suck like crazy. Like, oh, there's my song. I'm gonna be a Deep Purple fan for the rest of my life. And so they are absolutely able to remember music that's presented while they're still in their mom's womb. What else? Well, you may have heard this sort of thing before about infants, that they seem to have abilities that we have lost as adults. Okay, maybe you've heard this with regard to language, right? So infants are known to be sensitive to language's sound distinctions in the native language of the parents, but also other languages, right? So there are distinctions, for example, in English that don't exist in Japanese. The LR distinction is not a significant speech sound distinction in Japanese, right? So if someone's learning English later, if an adult Japanese person is learning English as an adult, it takes them a while to be able to learn to hear that difference. But the Japanese infant can hear that difference, that LR difference, right away. Within the first year of life, they can hear it, and then they kind of start to hone in on their own language, Japanese, and they lose the ability to make that distinction. It can be retrained, as I said, in adulthood, but it's much harder. So the idea that infants are kind of super perceivers in some ways seems to be true of language sounds from other languages than the baby's native language. Okay, that is also true about music. Okay, so infants can make more, infants seem to be more sensitive to mistakes from other musical cultures besides their where they're born into than adults can. So for example, I do listen to some Indian music. I took a sitar lesson there too, but I am not by any means a specialist in it. And I would have trouble determining, if I'm listening to a musical piece, whether the musician has made a mistake or not. So I think this is a musical piece from India right here. Yeah. So I would be very hard pressed to know if there were any mistakes in that, if the sitar was playing a melody and played a note that shouldn't have been there. But when I was an infant, born in the United States, I could do that, which is really, really odd, right? Where if someone's born in India, and grows up only with Indian music, which probably isn't all that common. Probably they're listening to Western music as well, but somebody who's only exposed to traditional Indian music hears something like this as an adult. Okay. Sorry, everybody. So you could imagine that we would be able to determine if a mistake was made as someone was playing that piano piece, but somebody who grew up with Indian music and only Indian traditional music might not be able to. But when they were a baby, before the age of about 1, they could. Okay, so infants can detect mistakes from more musical cultures than can adults, which is interesting. That is similar to speech. We just talked about that, right? That RL distinction is something that a Japanese speaker loses after a year if they don't have constant exposure to English at that age, right? And it works across all languages. There's certain distinctions that native English speakers lose certainly as well, right? But that also happens with music. By the way, it also happens with faces. Just as a quick aside, I don't think we talk about this when we discuss faces, but infants are better able to make discrimination of monkey faces than human adults are. Okay, they seem to be more sensitive to very subtle differences between images of monkey faces that then they then lose after 1 year of life, because they then hone in on human adult faces, right? Which is interesting. But this is kind of this same idea that the first year of life, it seems like they have this kind of super sensitivity to musical, speech, and animal context that they then lose through the first year of life. Okay, great. That ends our discussion of music and sound overall. Let's stop here for a second before we get into smell and do one of our polling questions. And if there's any questions or anything, I'd be happy to answer them. But let's do one of our polling questions. I think we left off here. Yes, I don't think we did this one yet. This has to do with memory for the TV theme songs. Remember that little demonstration we did with listening to Friends and listening to the Jeopardy theme and the Simpsons theme, and remembering which was in the right key and all that sort of stuff. So your memory of a TV theme song is likely A, in the key and rhythm easiest for you to sing, B, in nearly the key and rhythm of the original song, C, in nearly the key of the original song, but a rhythm that's easiest for you to sing, or D, in the key easiest to sing, but in the rhythm of the original song. So, just make sure we understand what how this is being worded. There is the original theme, the Simpsons theme, which is in a specific key, but that could be a harder one for you to sing, because you have a lower voice. So when it comes to remembering the theme to The Simpsons, is it that you're remembering something close to the original key of the theme, or is it kind of transformed, so it's something that you're remembering it closer to where your voice would want to sing it? Okay, just using the voice as kind of something that's different from the original key, and the same things of rhythm. So just take your time and read through this. I'll give you a minute, and we'll then talk about the answer. Doing great. Well, only one of you has answered so far. It's okay. All right, I'll give you another 15 seconds here. Okay, this one's a little trickier, I understand, but hey, the good news is you have the answer to this for the test, right? Okay, let me share the results, and it looks like half of you got it right. The correct answer is, in fact, B, in nearly the key and rhythm of the original song. That is the correct answer. It is not C, it is B. All right. So the situation is when you are trying to remember the song, like the Simpsons song, you do come pretty darn close to remembering it in the key on which it's played, on TV, and you come even closer in accuracy to the rhythmicity. I think I mentioned to you, if you were to hear the Simpsons theme sped up or slowed down, you'd be very aware that it was not at the right speed. So the correct answer is B, the key and rhythm of the original song. Our memory is of the original, okay? Even if it's hard for us to sing in that key, even if it's hard for us to sing that quickly, doesn't make a difference. Our memory seems to be of the original, even without knowing what a key is, right? That's something that your brain can do. All right, so the correct answer there is B. Make sure you've taken a picture and you circle the correct answer because there's half and half there. So it is absolutely B, and nearly the key and rhythm of the original song. Okay, great. We'll do some more of those later on. Let's close this. And we're about to go into smell. If you have any questions or anything about music or about that last test practice question, let me know. Otherwise, we'll continue. All right. So, you know something? I updated, I'm sorry, I'll do this again. I updated my Zoom app, and I assume everything's going to work better at some point. But right now, it is doing some freaky things. Okay. Share sound. And hold on. I apologize, everybody. Let me do this one more time. Good. I got it. We don't need sound, but let's just set it up just in case. Okay. I'm assuming you see a slide that says anosmia on it. That's great. And that's how I want to talk about smell. Now, let me just give you this quick reminder about smell. Smell's the bomb. I think smell is so friggin' cool. As I mentioned, I didn't know very much about it because I studied audio-visual integration, and I knew a lot about auditory perception and visual perception and touch perception, but I knew nothing or very little about smell. What I knew about smell, I had heard a little bit about conferences, and I had taught a little bit about smell in my perception class. But boy, when I was writing the book, I learned so many interesting things about smell. And the truth is that our brain is using smell information all the time, despite our own experience of smell as something that's fleeting, okay, as something that is, kind of being processed when we first go into a new space, but then stops being processed when we're no longer aware of it. It is always being processed. Our brain is always using smell information and using it in a very sophisticated way. I think one of the best ways for us to get into that discussion, though, is to talk about folks that have trouble smelling. Folks that have either a weak sense of smell or possibly no sense of smell. And as it turns out, there's many more of these folks than you might imagine. As it turns out, there's at least 2 million, 2 million in the US. That's what anosmia is. It's an inability to have your smell function working. But as you're going to see, it has more than just ramifications for smell, right? The folks that have this, the majority are untreated for whatever reason. They think maybe it's just a function of getting older, and that's okay, whatever. But for some people, it can be very severe. And I'm going to introduce you to somebody in just a second for whom it was very severe and had really a difficult time dealing with it. Most of the time when people have anosmia, it's not something that is recognized from their sense of smell as much as their sense of taste. So people will notice that they couldn't taste food the way they used to. And you'll learn something about the relationship between smell and taste. Well, I'll talk about it a little bit next week, but you'll learn more about it in your discussion section on Monday. But smell very strongly influences your sense of taste. So people with anosmia not only have trouble smelling things, they have trouble tasting things. Things don't taste as vivid as they used to. They end up having to salt their food more than they had in the past. They add spicy condiments to their food much more than they had in their past. And that was absolutely the case with Carl Wunsch, who is this really very kind gentleman that I was able to interview, and has been, kind of very outspoken and very kind of active in the anosmia community. Now, the other really interesting thing about Carl and why he was such a wonderful subject to interview is he is in fact a perceptual psychologist. He teaches perceptual psychology as a professor at a school in the Midwest, I believe. So he's very aware of research in perceptual psychology. So it was really useful. He started noticing that he was having trouble tasting food as much as he had in the past, but didn't worry too much about it. He was just salting things more, as I said, something very common to do. But then he did notice two events that really made him take action on this. I guess one day he was reheating a casserole that had been in the refrigerator for a week or so. And his wife came in and said, "Oh my gosh, what are you cooking? It smells absolutely terrible, like it's gone rancid. You got to throw that out." And Carl said, I don't smell anything bad. It doesn't smell bad to me at all. And they looked at it and it had actually gone bad. And if his wife hadn't come in, he could have eaten it and could probably gotten a little sick. And so he was alerted to something going on with his sense of smell. And then the final thing was he was digging in his backyard, not sure the purpose of the digging, but this happens sometimes. People dig in their yards and they mistakenly break into a gas line. And I guess that had happened, and his daughter was outside with him at the time, and she said, "Oh my gosh, do you smell that gas? That you must have broken the gas line. We need to call the gas company immediately." And he said, "I have no sense of that whatsoever. I do not smell the natural gas smell at all." And she was right. Gas company came over and took care of the problem. But that could have been very dangerous. If he continued to dig on that line and created a spark or something like that, that could have been very serious. So he went to the doctor, who did some tests on his sense of smell, and it turns out, yeah, it was a serious case of anosmia. In his case, it was caused by severe sinus polyps. These are kind of these little, polyps they're little growths that can happen inside the body. They're like this. They look like this, and that kind of prevented the air to get to the back of the nose here, where it needs to be picked up by the nerve cells that are responsible to convey to the brain, all that sort of thing. And this is a very common sort of cause of anosmia, these sort of polyps. They can be surgically removed, and in Carl's case, they were multiple times, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But what the doctor told him is, for the time being, before we schedule the surgery, there are things you need to do, and this is something all serious anosmics have to do. They have to put things up in their home. So he immediately put a natural gas detector. You can, like the fire detectors, the smoke detectors in your home, there are also natural gas detectors that can determine, that can warn you if there's a gas leak in the house. And so he put that up. He was very careful not to, he was only eating the leftovers after a few days. He wouldn't eat leftovers after more than that without asking somebody if it smelled okay. And then the food compensations, as I mentioned, he adds much more salt to food. He adds spices to everything. Him and his family have to kind of work out when he's cooking dinner, it's his turn to cook dinner. He has a tendency to over salt or over spice things. So he now knows to do it afterwards. It's, very common with anosmics. For Carl, and I will tell you the ultimate outcome of the story is positive. He now has taken care of it, but it was the case he had to have multiple surgeries. And the multiple surgeries, there were recurrences. And he said that for a number of years, You know, he would have the surgeries, things would seem better. And every morning, to make sure that they stayed better, he'd run into his kitchen and open a jar of peanut butter to see if he could smell it. This is a very common thing with anosmics as they're going through treatment. Peanut butter is one of the most kind of, you know, kind of one of the most recognizable smells. So very often they'll use that. Sometimes, you know, Carl would go outside and grab some grass and tear it, because the you know, the smell of grass is also a very kind of recognizable smell. But then he noticed across, you know, a number of weeks, months, that the smell of the peanut butter, the smell of the grass would not be as strong, and he'd have to go back to the doctor, and then, you know, inevitably they'd have more polyps they would have to remove. And, you know, he said it was really frustrating going through all these different procedures, multiple surgeries. They also use antihistamines and you know, sinus medications, things like that for these folks. But, you know, he said that, you know, he's, as I said, he's very active in the anosmia community, and, you know, on chat boards and that sort of thing. And he said that one thing you notice is that it doesn't, you know, maybe losing your sense of smell doesn't seem as serious as losing your sight and your hearing. And it's true, it doesn't, you know, really impede your mobility and your ability to work and all that sort of thing. But he said that when you go to the discussion boards, you see a common theme with people that lose their sense of smell, and that is depression. Not just depression because of the frustration of having to go through the treatment, but depression that seems to be related to it, the fact that it's one smell that is lost. So there is, you know, for people who, for example, have young children, have infants, for example, very often they convey how sad it is that they can't smell their children the way they used to, if in fact their anosmia is getting worse. And Carl said that, you know, when going back and forth like this, losing a sense of smell, having it, you know, kind of reappear from these surgeries, from these treatments, that the thing he realized he missed most was the smell of other people, which was interesting. He said, yeah, I miss the smell of peanut butter and food and grass and leaves and all that stuff. But boy, when I lost my sense of smell, the thing I really would miss is the smell of other people, right? And I said, well, what do you mean, like perfume, like shampoo smell, something like that? You know, laundry detergent smell? Yeah, a little bit. But I also really missed the kind of natural sense, like the you know, the smell of my family members. You know, even if they hadn't just showered or something like that. I realized that that's something if I attend to, I can kind of smell, and I miss that. And that's a very kind of common sort of description of what these people feel as they're going through this. They miss the smell of other people. Okay. You know, said it affected his romantic life to some degree. It affected his you know, relationships, you know, his emotional relationship with his wife to some degree. And when things were better for him, when, you know, the treatment worked, that it affected his emotional life. So you do find that's very common with anosmics, that they do report depression, and possibly depression that relates to, you know, the I guess intimacy that potentially smell can bring. And I think his intuitions here are very on target, because there is a lot of research that one of the things that we are best at, one of the things that we are most sensitive to, even if we're not conscious of our brains being sensitive to, is the smell of other people. I'll mention that. I'll talk about that in just a second. However, I want to give you the good news, is that the last time I talked to Carl, he is in remission. The surgery, I guess the last surgeries that he had worked. He's on a medication that keeps the polyps down, and he's doing well. He's doing well. He now can, you know, be one of these folks that talks about, you know, his treatment and can help people understand what treatments work and what treatments are less effective. And so it's a happy ending to this story, at least. But I want to concentrate on this idea of being able to smell other people, because I think it's really, really important. It's something we don't think about. It's something we don't necessarily have conscious awareness of, but we do. We know that secret smell of people. And what I'm talking about now with regard to smell, and I did mention this in the very beginning of the course when we introduced smell, or just very briefly, is the smell of a person, not from, like the sweat body odor that, you smell your t-shirt after you work out or after it's really, after a hot day. But, when as long as we're talking about normal, non-sweat smells, like the smell of your t-shirt, of somebody else's t-shirt after they've worn it overnight or something like that. It's not like the kind of body odor smell necessarily. It's not the kind of sweats underarm smell. It's just it's a shirt that smells like it's been worn, right? That's the sort of smell we're talking about. And, without actually, picking up somebody's shirt and smelling it, we are unaware of that smell often, but our brains are always using that smell, it's argued. As I said, your attention can be drawn to it. Okay, for example, the idea that we all have what's called a scent signature. So I'm missing a slide here on my notes. That's okay. I'll be able to use the display. We all have a scent signature. We all have, because of our metabolism, our genetics, as you'll see, we all have a signature that's specific to us, okay, in almost all cases. You'll see one deviation from that. And that signature is something that seems to be detectable, especially by our family members. Okay, you can probably, if I presented 5 t-shirts to you and I said, which t-shirt was worn by your significant other? Yeah, you'd be able to do it probably. But not as well as if you were doing it of your sibling, if it was your sibling's t-shirts. And we'll talk about why that might be in just a second. But we are talking about natural odors, and many of the experiments we'll be talking about are done with t-shirts or underarm swabs. And again, we're not talking about the sweaty kind of bacterial underarm scent that people smell like after they've worked out. We're talking about the scent of their underarms when they wake up in the morning or something like that and aren't that sweaty. It is their natural scent. It is their scent signature. Okay. So in a lot of these experiments, t-shirts are used. Right? You have 10 people wear t-shirts overnight, having not showered or used any sort of perfume or deodorant, during that time or before that time. And you then present the t-shirts to people and see if they can identify who wore the t-shirts. It's that type of thing. Okay. Newborns can do this with their moms right away. Okay. When you were born, you showed that kind of sucking response, that pacifier sucking response, when, say, your mom's t-shirt was put in front of your little baby nose versus a stranger's t-shirt was put in front of your baby's nose, okay, your baby nose. You would start sucking faster when it was your mom's natural scent that was in front of you than a stranger's natural scent. So as soon as you're born, you have this kind of sensitivity to your mother's scent. What else? Well, it could be that you're so sensitive to your mother's scent when you're born because, in fact, what you can also smell is your own amniotic fluid, okay? The stuff you're swimming in before you're born. If in fact it's saved, and often it is, if the umbilical cord is saved for genetic purposes or something like that. If a kind of cotton ball with your own amniotic fluid is put in front of you versus a cotton ball of another baby's amniotic fluid is put in front of you, you will start sucking faster. Okay, you're sensitive to that as well. And the amniotic fluid that you're swimming in has contributions from both the mother and the infant. I hate to tell you this, but what you were swimming in was to some degree your own pee-pee, but the amniotic fluid is also contributed to from the mother's fluids, body fluids. So it could be that you're able to recognize the scent of your mom as soon as you're born because you swam in the amniotic fluid that was partly made up of your mom's scent the entire time you're in the womb. Okay, what else? Well, mothers can recognize their child's amniotic fluid immediately after the child is born. So, you know, given the swabs, now we're talking about moms, not the newborns. The mothers say, "Oh yeah, that's my baby. I can recognize my baby. That's from my baby, and that one I must be from a stranger's baby." That sort of thing. By 5, we are able to start recognizing our sibling scents from T-shirts. Okay. So at 5, you know, you say you have an older brother or sister, and they wear a T-shirt overnight, and then you're given that T-shirt along with another, I guess, 9 T-shirts from other kids the same age as your sibling, and you're asked to sniff the T-shirts and say which is of your sibling, and you are almost perfect at doing that. It's very few instances where you're not able to do that readily. Say, "Oh yeah, that's my big brother, that's my big sister," at the age of 5. And that's maintained through adulthood. So as an adult right now, if I gave you 10 T-shirts and said, "Who's your brother? Which one was worn by your brother? Which one was worn by your sister?" you would be able to do that. Okay, you'd be able to say, "Oh yeah, no question." It's a very striking sort of thing. You can smell it pretty readily. Okay, I don't know who these people are. And again, these are natural body odors. Okay, these are not the perfume that your siblings tend to wear or the shampoo they tend to use. They're told not to do that for the entire day, you know, leading up to the night they're wearing the T-shirt. And it's not a sweaty smell. Okay, you know, they make sure that that's not present in the T-shirt. It's their natural odor. Okay, it's not the bacterial, again, not the bacterial smell of underarm that you smell at the gym. Okay, that is something you can still do, no question. Parents can recognize their children's scent. Mothers can recognize it pretty much immediately. It takes a little while longer for fathers to recognize it. I can't, do I have that there? Oh yeah, okay, I don't have that. I think fathers recognize it after a few months. Mothers recognize their children's scent immediately after the child is born. There is one exception. So parents can tell not only that it's their child, but they can tell which child it is, right? So, you know, if you were to wear a T-shirt when you were 5 and your sibling who is 7, say, wore a T-shirt, and then those 2 T-shirts along with another 8 T-shirts were given to your parents, and your parents were told to pick out your kids' T-shirts, they would be able to say, "Oh yeah, here's my kids, and this is Billy, and this is Margaret." Okay, they can make that distinction, except for one scenario. And that scenario is if you have an identical twin. Identical twins seem to have the same scent signature. Okay? So identical twins, when they're born, the parents can recognize that it is their children, but they can't determine whether this is Billy or Bobby. And if you have twins, don't ever call them Billy and Bobby. That's way confusing. Okay, but say those are the twins, they're identical, right? Not fraternal, they're identical. Parents can't make that distinction. And in fact, it's not just parents that can't distinguish between their identical twin children. Dogs can't either. So you know a little bit about dogs being trained to track scent. You know, if somebody's lost or if there's, you know, somebody is a perpetrator or something like that, so they can, you know, they're running away or whatever, and they can find them. The dogs can, you know, be given an article of clothing. However, if that article of clothing is from the twin rather than the person who is the perpetrator, the dog can't make that discrimination either, which is interesting because I think that kind of adds to this story about what is going to affect our scent signature, what is going to be determining the type of scent signature that we have. Okay, it seems that there's a genetic component. So, you know, identical twins are genetically identical. And if that's the case, right, then potentially the scent signature is in fact determined by the genetic makeup of the individual, at least largely the genetic makeup of the individual. We'll come back to that in a second, but this is kind of a good initial place to talk about that fact, okay? Parents do recognize their children very well. Parents can also recognize their stepchildren's scent, but less well, okay? In other words, if you were in a blended family, and it could even be that, your step parent actually spent more time with their stepchildren than their own biological children, right? They got remarried and then had additional children after the original children. It is the case that the parent can recognize their own biological children better, even if they've spent more years living with the stepchild, which is interesting. So experience certainly plays a role, but it looks like something else is playing a role too, some sort of genetic relationship between the actual parent and the child. So they are better, more consistent at recognizing their biological children than their stepchildren, even if they've lived with their stepchildren longer. Okay, and it's also true of siblings. Even siblings recognize their step siblings less well, even if they've lived with them longer than their biological siblings. And I guess that's less likely to happen, but it can, and that is the case. That they, experience does play a role here, but there's something else going on when it comes to the sense signature and our sensitivity to the sense signature. Clearly, it seems like there's something genetic going on. Okay, so it could be that we're able to recognize the sense signature of people who have a common, kind of, or I guess a related genetic makeup to our own, such that our recognition of other people's sense signatures is partly related to the recognition of our own sense signatures. We'll kind of expand on that in just a second. But it could be that parents recognize their biological children more easily than their stepchildren because there's something similar, something related in their biological sense signature to the parent's own sense signature. That could be the genetic background of the sense signature, as we'll discuss. Okay. But it is the case that you can recognize non-relatives. As I said, you can recognize your significant other, your romantic partner or friends that you know well, right? If I gave you 10 t-shirts and asked you to pick out your romantic partner's t-shirts based on their natural scent, it is something that you would be able to do it better than chance levels, okay? Certainly. Same with friends that you've known for a long time. You do a pretty good job with 10 t-shirts picking out which one of them was the one your friend wore the previous night. Okay, you do a pretty good job at that too. But you would never do as well in those test situations as you would at recognizing your relatives. So right now, I mean, there's no question, when you get to my age, I've certainly spent many, many more years in close proximity to my wife than I have my brother, right? I lived with my brother for 16 years, I guess. He's 2 years younger than me, right before I went on to college. But I've lived with my wife for, 22 years. I would certainly be able to recognize my brother's t-shirt more easily than my wife's t-shirt, which seems strange. I've had more experience. I've certainly closer proximity and many, many more hours with my wife than my brother. But I would be able to recognize my brother's t-shirt more readily, more consistently, more easily, which is giving us a clue to what's going on. What are we smelling then? It seems clear that there's something to do with the genetics, both in what determines the sense signature and what determines our sensitivity to the sense signature. And we believe it's this. We believe that there's a genetic influence on our sense signatures from something called the major histocompatibility complex. That's the most complex technical term we've gotten all quarter, but I don't care that you can pronounce it right. I'm not going to use another term that's very similar to this. You're not going to be tested on whether the spelling is right or anything like that. It's the concept I want you to know. By the way, the histocompatibility thing is one of the kind of the distractor items we saw on a test having to do with sound before. Maybe you notice it, but it doesn't have to do with sound. It has to do with smell, and it has to do with also our immune systems and our autoimmune systems. So what is it? we'll abbreviate it with MHC. And you're seeing an image of it there as it's been kind of imaged in the scientific community. It's a part of our genome that's very dense, that has a lot of information in there. And it seems to be part of the genome that is related to how our immune and our autoimmune systems work. Okay, so to the degree that we have strong immunity, the degree that our autoimmune system is effective, it seems that the genetic coding there is very, very important. Okay, so it is related to our immune and our autoimmune systems. And you can see it actually really is interesting that it's related to those dimensions as well as what we believe is our natural odor. We believe that the major histocompatibility complex helps determine the way our natural odor is, or the characteristics of our natural odor. And as you're going to see when we go through this, there's some really, really interesting research on how our natural odors might be related to some small degree mate selection. We'll be talking about this soon. Let me see let me make sure I've got this here. Yeah. Yes. Okay. We're going to be talking about this soon with regard to things like subliminal odors and how they can influence us. However, we can talk about this now, I suppose, a little bit. It's going to have influences on our socio-sexual choices to some degree. And this is always something that kind of freaks people out a little bit when I discuss it. If in fact, I were to put 10 strangers' t-shirts in front of you, and I think most of this research, by the way, is done with heterosexuals or people, certainly on that end of a continuum or something like that, just so you know. If I were to put 10 t-shirts of males that were strangers in front of female subjects and ask them to choose which is the most appealing, which natural scent from these 10 t-shirts is most appealing to them, they will choose a t-shirt from a man who has, okay, ready for this, an immune system that nicely complements their own immune system. Okay, let me say that again. Okay, you're a female, you're in an experiment. Okay, the first thing that you do in the experiment, by the way, is you give a little DNA sample. So they swab your, I guess, your inner mouth or something like that for this sort of test, very non-intrusive. And they do an analysis, on your MHC, and they know now something about your immune system, what your immune system is good at what it's strong about, what it's strong with, what it's a little weaker with when it comes to various types of diseases and that sort of thing. Okay, and at the same time, they have these men that are going to be the ones that are going to provide the t-shirts, provide their smell. And they also do the DNA test on those folks. So not only do they have the men's t-shirts, they also have information about their MHC, about their major histocompatibility complex, and their immune systems, what they are, what their immune system is good at, preventing disease, which diseases their immune systems are good at, which ones they're less good at. Okay. And what you find is when women are asked to pick a t-shirt they think is from a man that smells most attractive, they will often pick a t-shirt from a man whose immune and autoimmune systems best complement their own. What do I mean that best complement their own? It's not going to be an immune system that is just like theirs. It's going to be one that kind of fills in the gaps. So, if the woman, is really strong, has a strong immune system that would ward off disease A, okay, but not B very well, not disease B very well, they would pick a t-shirt from a man whose immune system was good at warding off B, but maybe not A that well. So this is what I mean, is I always do this when I do complementarity, right? There's kind of a choice based on, it would seem, the scent that is communicating which autoimmune system would best complement one's own. Why would that be the case? Because it means that the couples, if they were ever to get married and have kids, the couple's offspring would have influences on its immune system that came from two different sources that complemented each other. By finding the smell of a man whose immune system complemented one's own as attractive, one could potentially choose mates whose offspring were healthier. Now, we know this is a factor when it comes to mating selection in rodents, and I believe, well, where else has this been done? Deer, I believe, and other sorts of large mammals, I believe. As we'll see, it's more complicated for people. But at least in these experiments, it seems that women find men's natural sense appealing if those autoimmune systems would be good complementary systems, so the offspring could be healthier and have very healthy immune systems. Okay, we'll be talking more about this a little bit when we talk about unconscious scent, but I wanted to bring this up now. Okay, and then finally, before we do move to unconscious scent, there's one other thing I want to say, and that has to do with choices of cologne. You might think, okay, our natural scents are, this is really interesting, this makes sense, but a lot of times we try to disguise our natural scent, right, with using cologne or using perfume, or choosing a shampoo that we like the smell of and smells good on us, choosing soap that we like the smell of and smells good on us. It turns out that there's evidence that the selection of one's perfume, the one that we think smells good on us, the one that we think smells, the shampoo that we think we smell good wearing, right, that smell, right, is to some degree influenced by our genetic makeup. And some of you might know this, and might have noticed this before, that a perfume, that a cologne can smell good on our friend, but when we put it on, it doesn't smell that good. Has that ever happened to you? Have you ever noticed that sort of thing? You borrow your friend's, smelly stuff. My 19-year-old is really into that Axe body spray stuff. I guess maybe this is something everyone goes through. It's pretty strong smelling stuff. I guess his girlfriend likes it. And I would imagine it would cover up any type of smell at all. But he says that he likes some smells better than other smells, and some smell better on him than others do. And I think this is because I guess you go to the drugstore and there's tons of these different scents for the Axe body spray. But you might have noticed this for yourself. Something that smells good on a friend might not smell good on you, right? And what determines if something smells good on you versus a friend, maybe what even determines to some degree your preferences in the smells, seems to have some relationship to your own scent signature, to your own major histocompatibility complex. So in a way, okay, when we're selecting a scent that we want to wear when we go out to a party or something like that, we might not be hiding our natural scent. We might in some ways be kind of signaling, maybe amplifying our natural scent in a way. Okay, which is an interesting thing. Now, clearly, putting on a perfume is not going to make you smell, like more sweaty or something like that. But there could be components in that perfume or in that cologne that are, kind of signaling that we have this type of natural scent signature, which is interesting, I think. Okay, so even though we try to cover things up, that covering could be to some degree determined by our natural scent signature, and therefore the kind of genetic makeup that goes behind our natural scent signature related to this major histocompatibility complex. Okay, cool. Let's take our 10-minute break now. We'll come back and we'll do another test question. But what do I have? I have 11:35. So at 11:45, we'll restart with class and think about questions. People often have a lot of questions about this sort of thing, understandably. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you have at that time. I see you in 10 Okay, we're back. Let's see, where do we leave things off? We're going to do a poll question, aren't we? Okay, let's do a practice exam question. So let's see. Yeah, this is a good one. It's music. So let me read this out loud first. Which of the following cues for sad music are more likely specific to Western music, culturally specific to Western music? Okay, which ones are specific to Western music? Slow pace, quiet, minor versus major tonality, or all of the above? Which ones are specific to us? So that means which ones are going to be pretty much only found in Western music, where the other ones are potentially more culturally universal. Okay. Go ahead and give you a minute to do this. What are we doing here? Good, another 20 seconds or so. Good, I'm glad I asked this one. It is trickier. And you get the answer for free. All right, I'm going to end the poll now and we will talk about the answer. Actually, this is one of these instances where a majority of you got this wrong. Now, let's go ahead and take our time to make sure we understand this. That all of the above answer. Okay, so you're right, I do have a lot of questions on my exam where all of the above is the right answer. It is not right here. Okay, so it's important that you, read the question carefully and not assume that the answer is always going to be all of the above, even though I do have a tendency to use those sort of answers often. All of these are related to sad music. Okay, so sad music is so sad music is slower. Typically, we talk slower, and that's something. It is quiet. And actually, I realized that quiet. I didn't mention quiet actually when I was talking about it. What I talked about was kind of more constricted when it came to pitch differences. So yeah, but that is quiet along with the pitch difference thing are both general along with slow pace to all styles of music, it seems. Yeah, I should probably change that on the exam. So actually, this question will be changed on the exam. So this doesn't say quiet. This says restricted pitch range or something like that, as I actually discussed it in the lecture. I think both things are discussed in the book, by the way. But as I discussed in the lecture, restricted pitch range, I'm going to change that on the exam. That's okay. But the correct answer is C. Okay. These other characteristics, slow pace, restricted pitch range, and quiet for that matter, are general across musical cultures. What seems to be specific to more Western music in conveying sad versus happy music is that minor versus major tonality. So it is not the case that all of the above are specific to Western music. These exist and these occur in Indian ragas and all that sort of stuff too. It is this minor versus major tonality that pretty much seems specific to Western styles of music. Okay, so the correct answer here is C. You cannot see my screen. I am not sharing yet, but okay. Oh, shoot. I'm sorry. I didn't share the results. I apologize for that. Most people chose D. The correct answer is C. Okay, I apologize. Thank you for telling me that. Correct answer is not. It is true that a sad music has slow pace and a truncated pitch range, which are a restricted pitch range, and quiet, but that is true of all styles of music, not just Western. What seems to be true just to Western or largely to Western music is this minor versus major tonality. The correct answer, when you see this on the exam, is C, not D. Okay, and I also will change this so it's more specific to the lecture material. Okay. All right.
I have a question, Professor.
Yep.
When we're talking about kind of tonality within the cultures we're talking about, kind of how we're talking if a Spaniard had a love song and an American had a love song, you're saying basically the American breakup song would be different, where the Spanish breakup song would kind of be the same tones as the love song itself? Or
Spanish music would be considered.
Is that the difference?
Spanish music would be considered a Western style of music as well. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. An Indian style music might not. So both a Spanish and an American would have this as minor tonality as conveying sad. So, there are many Spanish songs, from Mexico, flamenco from, Portugal and Spain, that, will have minor tonality for sad song. Where you don't hear that minor would be in what's called non-Western music, which would be like Indian music, native Chinese and Japanese, traditional Chinese and Japanese music. They will not distinguish happy and sad by doing this. Happy, sad, happy, sad. That's not like that in those styles of music. The way they will convey happy and sad is to play slower, to play with a more restricted pitch range, and to play a little quieter. But so those are probably culturally universal sort of characteristics, but they will not use the major and minor. Okay, does that make sense?
Okay, yeah. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions on this? Looks like there's yes, so the correct answer is C, minor versus major tonality. That is absolutely true. Sorry about not being able to see. Okay, so where is that answer now? Oh, I guess I put it away. Okay, so, all right, that's cool. Hopefully, I apologize that was a little confusing, that question, but you have the answer now. I have to change it a tiny bit, but it shouldn't be confusing. The correct answer is the major, minor versus major tonality. Let's go back to scent, but before we continue with our scent, actually, let me go ahead and put this up. I can do that. Okay, hopefully you're seeing that. That's our slide from before. Let me stop here and see if there's any questions, because people often kind of find this stuff really kind of provocative. The idea that we might choose mates, or that the success of mates in relationships might have something to do with their natural scent. It does seem a little provocative. It seems maybe a little intimidating. In fact, you can go online if you want, and you and your significant other can each provide DNA to a company, and they will look at the compatibility, the complementarity, again, between the major histocompatibility complexes of each of you, whether your immune systems are complementing each other, or whether there's too much overlap or something like that. I wouldn't do that, because a lot more comes into both mating selection and success in long-term relationships than just how a person's MHC is structured relative to your own, and how their scent signature is relative to your own. So there are companies that, say, okay, let's check these things out and see if your relationship's going to last depending on your MHC structure. Again, it's a lot more goes into it. We do know that this sort of thing does play a role in animal mate selection, okay? Although we're going to see it's more complex for people. But go. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm so interested in this point about kind of the
immune system and your autoimmune systems, and kind of how that translates to your odor, and how that translates to, more people picking your shirt or whatever, experiment we're running. Do we see any indication that like we could put somebody who has like immunodeficiency in a shirt? Do we see that people don't pick that shirt, or have we ever tested like immunodeficiency?
I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the context of, actually in a couple of slides, in the context of asymmetry. So a certain type of immunodeficiency that's genetically based will be conveyed in the asymmetry, both in the facial asymmetry and the bodily asymmetry of, we know this absolutely exists for animals, and it does to some degree exist for people as well. And we're going to show that one of the appealing things about a person's smell, and typically this is female smelling men, is that more generally appealing smells will come from people who have more I guess morphological physical symmetry in their appearance, which is interesting. So yes, it does have a bearing on that type of thing. So, but we're talking there about very dramatic immunodeficiencies, not, kind of things that maybe are more subtle and acquired later in life and things like that. So it's, we're talking about kind of, the big data with very dramatic differences. Also, as you'll see, the things that we'll be talking about with regard to smell are, detectable to some degree. It's unclear how much they actually play a role in mate selection, or something like that. With people, things are always more complex than with animals, where it does seem that, an asymmetric animal that does have some sort of immune system problems will, find that have less mates, less offspring, and if they have offspring, less healthy offspring. But we're talking about very dramatic differences between these. Okay, does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Other questions on this? Because I know this kind of freaks people out. It's like, well, I'm in a relationship right now. I wonder if they have a good kind of complementary immune system to my own. So if we ever had kids, that they'd be healthy, right? Well, so many different things go into this. I would not pay to have your DNA analyzed for this purpose. But really, it's unclear how much of a bearing it has on people. But it's interesting stuff. I mean, this is one of the reasons I think that smell is such a fascinating topic as well. Like, we not only are we unaware of our brain analyzing smell for a good portion of our daily activities, it seems that it's something that can detect real kind of interesting aspects, characteristics of people's genetic makeup potentially. So I think it's very cool. Anything else on this? We'll continue talking about smell, but okay. What we're going to do now is move to subliminal odors. And as you'll notice in the book, there are 2 chapters on smell because it's so cool. The first one really has mostly to do with sense experiments where people are actually asked to recognize people kind of overtly. But now we're going to move into kind of more hidden aspects of smell, things that experiments and situations in which people aren't aware, people aren't explicitly asked to make judgments on smell. Okay, and we're going to get into this by meeting a real colorful couple I was able to interview. And there they are right there. That is Mark Peltier and Eileen Kenny. And real interesting folks. They grew up in the 60s, and I clearly had an influence on them in many ways, mostly positive. But they were kind of very aware of how powerful scent was. They did a lot of retreats in the 60s. They spent a lot of time in the woods doing encounter sessions and things like that, if you know anything about that. But their awareness, spending so much time in the woods in these kind of, alternative sort of situations, drugs were related, I'll put it that way, kind of drew their attention to the smell of the woods and what it was doing for them emotionally. They said, wouldn't it be nice if we could take this odor, the odor of the woods, the pine, all this stuff back with us? And they were kind of, therefore, at the lead in producing what's called environmental aromas in various commercial contexts. So maybe you've noticed this before. You walk into a hotel lobby and you've got the entire ambiance of the lobby. You've got the decor, the furniture, the art, the whatever else, kind of makes up this, very often it's a fancy hotel. It's a very striking sort of appearance. Maybe you hear a little music in the background. And maybe you've noticed that some places actually do have an aroma. And the aroma is being pumped in through the ventilation system of the hotel lobby. And Mark and Eileen were the first folks to actually start doing this, to offer this to hotels and department stores and boutique stores, where they put this device into the ventilation system, and it would pump through an odor that was provided through this chemical. Mark kind of did the engineering of the dispersion device. Eileen is the one that chooses the chemicals. So she's what's called a scent designer. And the idea is, for when it comes to environmental aroma, is to add to the decor of the space. She thinks of it, and I think she thinks of it rightly, as kind of the scent analog to whether the decor is modern or more traditional. If you go into what the W is, one of these more modern hotels. I don't know if you've ever been in one, but it's got a lot of chrome and glass and kind of very simple lines in the furniture and the art and all that sort of stuff. Where if you go to a Four Seasons, or maybe one of these beautiful old hotels in San Francisco, where things are much more traditional and florally, kind of. They have floral patterns on the furniture and the carpeting and all that sort of stuff. It's a different type of decor. And she has designed odors to match both of those sorts of environments. One that's more modern, maybe caters to a younger crowd. One that's more traditional and caters to maybe an older crowd that like the kind of beauty of the traditional style architecture of the old San Francisco hotels. And we'll talk about her more later on when we discuss multi-sensory relationships. I think she gives a really interesting story about that. But their profession, and they've been very successful with this, is to design and administer these scents to various environments. And maybe you've noticed this in hotel lobbies. Spas very often have this sort of thing. Like you walk into the front office, at a spa where you have a reservation to have a massage or something like that, or body wrap or whatever they do there. And you are, I think, made very aware of the sense of that place. And sometimes they're, just candles lit, but very often, if it's a chain spa or a large spa, the odor will be coming through the ventilation system. And it could very well be that it's Mark and Eileen who have provided that. Now, they became pretty well known at one point, as they were employed to provide an environmental odor to one of these large kind of theme hotels in Las Vegas. This is a long time ago. This is before there were so many theme hotels. Can't remember what years it is. It says in the book. It might have been the 90s, was it, or something like that? So back then, there weren't a lot of theme hotels. There were kind of like old school hotels, like you see in old movies. And then there was there were a couple of theme hotels. There was the Caesar's Palace, right? You've seen that, right? Which has this kind of Greek Roman theme. But Steve Wynn, you may have heard that name. There's a Wynn Hotel. Decided to open up his theme hotel then, called the Mirage. It's still there. So the one with the zoo in the back with the white tigers, and you know, it's got a theme. It's a, you know, it's kind of an odd theme. It's a Mirage. You know, so there are palm trees and things like that. But he decided to open this up, and it was at the time, you know, one of the biggest hotels in Vegas. And he hired Mark and Eileen to provide a smell for the lobby. And they did. By the way, the story of how they did this is interesting. It's in the book. He was very picky. Steve Wynn. By the way, that I don't know if you're not familiar with Steve Wynn's name, if you've seen the Ocean's 11 or the Ocean's movies, the character Andy Garcia's character, whose name I can't remember in the movie, is really based on Steve Wynn. Kind of a slick, big hotel owner. He asked them to design something for the Mirage, and they kept on coming up with scents that he didn't find appealing. And then they ended up at what he figured out ultimately was that he wanted the scent. He kept on asking for the scent of a vacation, the scent of the relaxation that you feel when you go on vacation. And so, you know, she would use flowers and all these things that you might smell in Hawaii and stuff. He said, no, that's not it. And then she realized what he wanted was the smell of suntan lotion. Okay. She figured this out, and she put the coconut smell, as suntan lotion sometimes has, into their dispersing odor. And that was the one he wanted. And that's the one that if you go to the Mirage now, you'll smell. You'll smell basically coconut in the lobby, or the coconut maybe mixed with some other things that smells like suntan lotion. That's what Steve Wynn wanted, and that's what he got. When the Mirage opened, it was by far the most popular hotel on the Strip. And people would stay there and gamble for hours. And everyone was wondering, what is it about the hotel that's making people go and stay, okay, and spend money? And some of the other hotel owners were maybe a little jealous, and they thought, there's that smell in there. And I wonder if it is in fact coercing people to gamble longer. Really, this was something that was a criticism against the Mirage and Steve Wynn. In fact, a number of these kind of investigative reporting shows that were on at the time, Katie Couric, I don't know if you know that name, but she had an investigative show. She actually, I guess, stormed into Mark and Eileen's laboratory and said, what are you doing to people at the Mirage? How are you keeping them there longer? How are you coercing them to gamble longer? And what's in that scent? Are you drugging them somehow? And Eileen said, no, it's really kind of just coconut. It smells like suntan lotion. And all we're doing is we're adding to the decor. Yeah, it might make it a pleasant place to stay because it smells nice, but it's also a pleasant place to stay because, the architecture is nice. There's palm trees around. There's a giant fish tank. If you've gone to the Mirage, I believe it's still there. There used to be a giant fish tank, at least behind the front desk. That's really cool, right? You've got the tigers in the back. All of this adds to the ambiance of the hotel. What she's doing is adding to the scent ambiance of the hotel. So is that coercing people to gamble more, to spend more money in it? It's unlikely, okay? However, it's interesting. So I think that's, that the overall idea is that was kind of a little bit of paranoia and maybe jealousy on the part of the other hotel owners, as well as Katie Couric, in the sense that, the assumption that the scent could coerce people to do things they don't want to. However, I think there's something interesting there. I don't think it's true that scent can make you really do something you don't want to do. Okay. Remember I said before, this is the idea of it's not going to make us choose our mates and stay in a healthy relationship, any more than a person's appearance, probably less than a person's visual appearance would. But there is something kind of intuitively mysterious about scent. I think I think I understand it to some degree, that I think we all can have an intuition about this to some degree, because scent seems so ephemeral, right? Like I've been saying, it's something you notice when you first walk into a room, but then your kind of your awareness of scent kind of leaves. It adapts, is what we say. You can become nose blind if you've ever seen those commercials. Like you no longer notice your kitty litter box, right? That's true. We adapt to it. So it's unlike, the decor that's provided visually, where you can always look and see, oh yeah, there's the fish tank that's so nice. There's the architecture, or the furniture and everything that's so nice. The palm trees. You can always be aware of that. You can always be aware of the music that's being played, which I don't know. I assume it has something to do with how, vacation in Hawaii or Mirage, I don't know. You can be aware of that too, but you can't be aware of the scent after a little while, right? Maybe if you leave for a second and come back, you can smell it again, but it's hard for you to concentrate on the scent once you've become adapted to it. And that makes it a little bit more mysterious. It makes it a little bit more kind of magic, but it doesn't really make it more coercive. It doesn't make us do things we want to do. It adds to the decor, just like the what you're seeing and what you're hearing. And maybe that makes you want to stay a little longer. If you go into a department store and it smells nice, you might want to stay longer. But and that might make you want to buy things because you're staying longer. But it's not making you do anything. But what it does to some degree unconsciously. It doesn't have a greater effect, but its effect can sometimes be unconscious, because it is the fact that your brain is constantly using odors. It really is, even when we're not aware of it. In fact, most of the time, our brain is analyzing odors without our awareness, without us even noticing there is a smell. And there's research that shows this. Okay, and we'll talk about that now. There's a little chat here before I move on to that. Let's see how we're doing here. Disneyland has a smell, Ivy? Cool.
They pump like cookie smell and everything.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm not surprised. Very cool. Okay. Thanks for that. Okay. But now let's move to the research that actually shows that, that there are unconscious effects of odor. Again, before we get into this, I want to make the point that it's not coercive. It doesn't make you do things you don't want to do, more so than a visual cue or an auditory cue. It just does so unconsciously, and that can be a little intimidating to people, which is probably why there was such a strong reaction to the other casino owners and the investigative reporters when it came to this. But let's talk about some of these experiments. So in one experiment, let's put ourselves in the experiment. You first go into a room, classroom, say on campus. Imagine yourself going to a classroom on campus, and you do a little math quiz. Something very short, something very easy. Okay. Unbeknownst to you, there is an odor being pumped into that room, but it's being pumped at what we call a subliminal level. What do I mean by subliminal? I mean that the odor exists in the room, but it is too weak for you to consciously notice. Okay, we're going to be talking a lot about these experiments today, where there's odors being presented, but we are not aware of the odor being presented. In this case, it's an odor of strawberry. Let's see. You do your math test, you don't smell anything, but we know as the experimenters, there's a little odor of strawberry going in there. And then you leave and go to a different room. And in this other room, you sit in front of a computer and you do basically, you're asked to do what Eileen Kenny kind of does. You say, okay, imagine now we're going to be associating different scents. And here's a list of scents that you have. Some of them fruits, some of them, like flowery. And we want you to, kind of just associate them with other rooms on campus. So you're going to see pictures of rooms on campus. I know it sounds like a really strange thing to do. And I know it seems like a strange thing to do, but go ahead. And when you see a room, maybe it's the one of the lobbies of the, the administration building. Maybe it's the front office of the psychology department, stuff like that. We want you to choose a scent that you think would work in there. People say, what? You know, this is the strangest thing I've ever done before. And so you start seeing rooms. You say, all right, I guess the banana one would work in there. Maybe the flower one would work in this. There's kind of, you know, maybe there's a flower painting on the wall or something. You know, people are kind of guessing. But guess what happens? They are then shown a picture of the room that they were just in. And guess what odor they choose? Yeah, even though it was subliminally presented before, no subjects had any awareness of ever having detected an odor in that room. Oops, I see my internet's a little unstable. Hopefully it's okay now. Internet okay? All right. They do, more often than not, choose the strawberry scent to be the one that's associated with the room where they got the subliminal strawberry scent. And that seems to be something that happens for most subjects in this experiment, which is interesting. Again, they've never detected the strawberry. They say, at any point in this experiment, did you smell any of these smells? No. Even when you were in this other room, no. It was being presented, but it was subliminal. Okay. What else? Oh, this is one of my wife's favorite experiments because she lives with 3 guys, me and the 2 boys. She likes this for the following reason. Imagine now you're in another experiment. You're a subject. You're sitting in a room, and all the tasks you have to do are, you know, kind of on the computer. All right. Unbeknownst to you, there is a subliminal smell being presented to you. Okay, it's coming through the ventilation system, but you are not aware of it. In this case, it's a clean smell. Pine sol is a very strong smell, but imagine so faint a smell of pine sol that you can't detect it consciously, but it is coming through the ventilation. Okay, so what happens in these computer tasks, okay, which you don't really ask about smell at all, you are asked to just read a list of words at first. You know, you're looking at a computer screen and words come up on the computer screen. Table, okay. Shiny, okay. Dolphin, all right. Let's see, soap, okay. And the question is, how quickly can you read these words? And you read them as quickly as possible. And there's very little time difference between how quickly you're reading them. You know, you're being timed, your voice is being recorded, and you know, the scientists are going to be able to measure the time between when you saw the word and when you started saying the word. Okay. And what they do is they look at each word, and as you might have noticed, as I went through that list of words, shiny, what did I say? Table, shiny, dolphin, and soap. 2 of those words, right, were related to clean, right? Soap and shiny related to cleanliness. As it turns out, you read those words more quickly if in fact you have this undetectable odor of a cleaning fluid pumped in. All right, so that's your word reading is faster. Here, I'll put this up now. What else? Okay, you're done with that part of the experiment, and then somebody comes in and say, okay, a couple more things we have for you to do. We want to know what you have planned for the rest of the day. Well, we're just going to take some notes what you have planned for the rest of the day. I should mention there's another group of subjects, by the way, who's doing the exact same thing, except they don't have the cleaning fluid pumped in, okay, because we need that kind of control group. If you are, though, in the group of subjects where the odor is being pumped in, okay, your plans are more likely to involve some sort of cleaning behavior, right? So you say, okay, well, after I leave here, I have to go to my car, and I think I'm going to get my car washed today. I've been planning on doing that eventually, and I think today's a good day for that. Or maybe I'll go back to my dorm room. I've got to straighten up. It's getting kind of crazy in there. You know, I have to do the dishes from last night. People are more likely to list that they'll be doing cleaning type of behaviors if in fact they get that subliminal odor being pumped through the ventilation system. Again, subliminal. They are not ever detecting the odor of the cleaning fluid. All right, this is one of my favorite parts of the experiment. Okay, thank you very much for your participation, and you are going to get credit for this. But not only are you going to get credit, you're getting a cookie. So everyone gets a cookie at the end of the experiment. And you get a little cookie, a little chocolate chip. Well, it's one of those nice Pepperidge Farm chocolate chip cookies with a napkin on it. You say, go ahead and eat your cookie. I'll be right back with your credit slip to make sure that you get a class credit for this. And so the experimenter leaves the room. The subject starts eating their cookie. They're being filmed. Okay, they're told this at the end, of course, but they're being secretly filmed. And the question is, how neatly do they eat the cookie? People differ on how neat they are when they eat, right? But do they hold the napkin up? If they drop a crumb, do they clean up the crumbs? And guess what? They are more likely to be neat eaters and crumb cleaners if in fact they get that subliminal odor of the cleaning fluid in the room as they're performing. Okay, so it actually does subtly induce more cleaning behavior. Now, let's make sure that we understand this. That's a very subtle difference. Not everybody shows the cookie behavior thing. And if they do, it's subtle. It's very subtle. And so, yes, I joke my wife likes this because guys tend to be a little messier. Certainly my boys do, despite our begging for them to clean their rooms and all that sort of stuff. Would presenting a cleaning fluid smell subliminally into their bedrooms induce more cleaning behaviors? Maybe a tiny bit. You're not going to, maybe not any more than showing what their room would look like, right? I mean, that's probably a better idea. Is you take, you finally get them to clean their room, and you take a picture of it and show them how much room or, kind of space that will feel like they have. That's probably more inducing for them to clean than the odor, but maybe the odor works a little bit. The interesting thing is, though, the odor thing works subliminally, right? It works just below their level of awareness. By the way, I don't remember if I defined this, I think, the first day, but all subliminal means is that it's not coercing people to do things they don't want to. That really isn't what subliminal is about. What subliminal means is that it's just below your level of awareness. That's it. That's it. It's no more coercive. That cleaning behavior is not any more coercive than if you put a sign there that said, please clean up after yourself. That'd probably be much more effective for people to clean up, right? Certainly. It just does so without their awareness of that stimulus being there. It's not going to force them to do things they don't want to do. It's not going to make them do dramatic changes in their behavior, but the information that gets to their brain is happening at a level below their consciousness. Okay. In fact, talking about consciousness and odors, you smell when you are, oopsie, oh, I guess I took this out. Okay, all right, that's okay. It's in your book if you're interested. I know sometimes people are interested in sleeping and dreaming. There's some interesting things in the book about that that I have on an old slide. I don't have on this current slide, so we can go a little faster. But smell does have an effect on dream content, on the content of your dreams. Okay, while you're sleeping, while you're unconscious, smell can have an effect on your dream content. If you get the smell of flowers in your room, you might have flowers in your dream. Okay, and it also can help consolidate memories. And I think I won't go into the details on that if you're interested in how sleep consolidates memory, and then how odor can have, a subliminal odor can have an effect on your memory. Take a look at what's in the book. I think you'll find it interesting. Okay, let's move on though and talk about fear. So you might know this, that insects particularly, and rodents are aware of an area where another insect or rodent has been made afraid. So if you want to threaten a cockroach, for example, it will let off an odor that is kind of specific to it being afraid. Same thing with rodents. When a rodent gets threatened, it will secrete an odor that will signal other rodents, stay away from here. Okay, and that's obviously evolutionarily adaptive, right? It makes sense. It's going to help. If there's, if a rodent's threatened by a snake, because there's a snake hole over here or something like that, it's nice that that smell is going to warn other rodents to stay away. Okay, that makes sense. Is there any remnant of that type of thing for people? And the answer is yes. And these are really, really interesting experiments, I think. I think you'll really find these fascinating. This is how it works. You take people, I think it's mostly, a lot of these experiments, by the way, have to do with or involve taking samples from men and presenting these samples to women. But men also seem to be sensitive to these sorts of things too, as the ones that are smelling, but for some reason women tend to be a little bit more sensitive. And I don't know the reason for this, and I haven't looked into this literature in a few years, so that might have changed. But in this case, this is what's going to happen. You take odors from men that have been on roller coasters. Actually, on this one, you can take odors from women too. And you take that sample from underneath their arms, where these things are communicated. Again, it's not this body odor sort of smell. It's a regular odor, right? I guess in this case it is men. I see this now. And then what you do is you present that odor, okay, that chemical compound from the scared men to people in the laboratory without them being aware that the smell is there. So again, this is undetectable odor, right? I think in this case, what they do is they take, if I remember this particular experiment, I think they take a cotton ball, they dip it in alcohol, and then on top of that, they add the chemical compound that's been taken from the scared men, the men that are going through the roller coaster. Also works, by the way, for like big exams like SATs or GREs or med boards. If you take the sample as right before the guys are going in, that also works, as it turns out. Then you add that to the alcohol cotton ball, and you put that right under the nose of the subjects in the laboratory. And all the subjects can smell is the alcohol. They say, okay, yeah, I do smell something. It is alcohol. I smell nothing else. That makes it an undetectable odor, this sweat sample, okay? And then you have them perform various tasks, all right? One task would be something like this. You show them a group of faces. That's why this is being shown right here. And actually, this isn't exactly what I wanted to show. You can basically take a happy face. This is pretty easy to do these days using Photoshop or other types of computer software. You take a person smiling and a person frowning or showing fear, like something like that, right? It's the same person. And then what you can do with these two kind of extreme faces, very happy, very scared, is you can set up a continuum of the happy face and make other faces that kind of interpolate between the two. So you have a happy face, a somewhat less happy face, a little less happy, just doing this through the computer program. And here you have a somewhat neutral face, and it gets a little scarier. The face seems a little more scared, a little more scared, a little more scared, until it's very scared. Okay, and then you present these faces one by one to subjects that are smelling unconsciously being presented the odor of a scared person, the odor of a scared man in this case. And what you'll find is that when it comes to categorizing these faces, especially ones in the middle, that are somewhere, ambiguous between happy and scared, they're more likely to categorize those faces in the middle as being scared faces if they're getting the smell than if they're not getting that smell. Okay, both groups of subjects are smelling the alcohol, but that one group is getting something on top of it, and it is that fearful smell. It will make them judge these kind of neutral faces as more scared looking than if they're not getting that smell. So there's one thing we have right there. It influences the perception of facial expressions. So faces that are more or less neutral or more neutral are interpreted as more fearful. Okay, as more negative. Okay, I already have that on there. What else do we get? Well, I'm going to teach you about a way of kind of testing fear in the laboratory that's not as kind of intrusive as you could test fear in the laboratory. It just has to do with this. Something really fun to do this with somewhere. Hold on. Where is this thing? Yeah, here it is. Maybe they use something like this. This is a great sound. Maybe you can hear that. I don't know if the audio is kind of damping that to some degree, but this is a really loud, intrusive sound. Great. Okay, what that's going to do when you hear a loud kind of startling sound is your eye is going to blink. It's called the startle reflex. Okay, and it always happens. You know, the startle reflex happens when you hear a loud sound that's unexpected and it's pretty close to you. So maybe people are wearing headphones. Maybe there's you know, kind of mean little research assistant behind you, and they have this, you know, this terrible sound effect thing, and they you know, play it behind your head. You're going to blink. The thing about the blinking, it's going to happen reflexively. All right. But the degree to which it happens, how quickly it happens, and how, I guess, dramatically it happens, how strongly it happens, can change depending on your state. So what induces the startle reflex is a sound in this case, but what then modulates it? What can determine how quickly it happens or how dramatically it happens, how much you blink, can be influenced by other things, including being presented an undetectable odor of a scared person. So your startle reflex, which is going to happen by sound anyway, will increase. It will be faster and it will be stronger if, in fact, you're being presented subliminally this odor of a scared person. So someone else's fear is heightening your fear a little bit and not inducing the reflex, but amplifying the reflex. What else does it do? Well, it seems to make you a little bit more vigilant. And what this means is that you know, you're asked to do a test on a computer where you're pushing one button if the two terms that are coming up are related, and another button if the two terms coming up are unrelated. So obviously hat and cap are related, leg and cup are unrelated. That's all I'm putting that up there for, just to kind of give you a sense of what the task is. And people find this very easy, but of course, what you're most interested in looking at is how quickly people can do it. Okay. And what you find is that if you, in fact, you are getting this subliminal odor being presented to you of a fearful person, you're a little bit more vigilant. You're a little faster at performing this test. You're not more accurate, but yeah, you're a little bit faster than if you're not getting that odor. Okay, which is, you know, kind of interesting. You know, if you want to be more vigilant, maybe you know, and respond faster to a certain task, it might, you know, pay to sit next to people who are nervous. Who knows? These are small effects, but they are consistent effects. And it's an effect that, you know, we typically don't think of as being something, you know, related. There's something that happens beyond insects and rodents and stuff like that. And don't get me wrong, you know, when you're presented the sweat of a fearful person, you're not going to run from the room. Like, you know, when a cockroach smells another cockroach's fear, they scatter like crazy. When a mouse smells another mouse's fear, they're going to run it like crazy. It's not like that type of response, but it is a response that seems systematic, although subtle, right? It kind of changes our interpretation of facial expressions, especially neutral ones. It doesn't induce the startle reflex. It amplifies it a little bit. And it enhances our vigilance when it comes to, you know, choosing or deciding whether words are related or unrelated. It is systematic. It's just not very strong, right? These are very kind of subtle but systematic effects. Interestingly, you can see differences in subjects too. If a subject, you can do personality tests like I don't know if you know about the Big Five. There's a very simple personality test that kind of look at different dimensions of personality. One is called the Big Five. You're not responsible to know this at this point. But one of the things it tests is neuroticism or anxiety. And people, as it turns out, who score higher on that dimension of neuroticism, they maybe consider themselves more anxious, show kind of enhanced influences from smell. So it affects all these things that I just listed: the facial expression interpretation, the amplification of the startle reflex, the vigilance on the related words task. That seems to be heightened more for people who turn out to be more anxious based on this personality questionnaire. That's what I mean by anxious sniffers here. Okay, if they are in fact presented the smell of another person who is scared, they won't know they're getting that smell, but they will show heightened, exaggerated kind of of responses when it comes to these very tasks. Okay. By the way, I don't think this may. I didn't put this in here. Never mind. I'm going to continue. There was something new. Just if you're interested, if you're interested in this type of thing, I'll just say it won't be on the test. But this also does work for disgust. If you take the sample from somebody who is disgusted for some reason, maybe you take the sample of somebody who's watching somebody eat something gross. Sometimes these reality shows ask people to do that, and they feel disgust themselves. If you take that odor and subliminally present it to people, they will more readily feel disgust than if they're not getting that odor. Anyway, let's go back to fear. This does mimic what goes on in the animal world. As I said, we know this works for ants and also cockroaches, mice, deer, and even amoeba show this sort of thing. They seem to keep away from where another amoeba has been threatened, and it's thought that it does have to do with some sort of chemical secretion that occurs. But what is very clear in all these scenarios is that the reactions differ, right? The reactions of the ants, mice, deer, and amoeba, which almost seem like reflexive kind of major behaviors where, the ants and mice run away, the deer run away if they smell another animal being threatened, right? And we know this does have to do with odor. These are major things, right? They're going to run for the hills. We don't do that. We're presented the odor of someone else who's scared, and we do not run. We might not even report that we feel more fearful. Might not be something that we're experiencing, but it does seem to influence in subtle yet systematic ways, which I think is very interesting. So there is kind of this, kind of evolutionary holdover, at least, that seems to affect us in more subtle ways, but the systematic ways that seem related to what happens to ants, mice, deer, and amoeba, which I think is interesting. Okay. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna take let's do one more question here, and then we're gonna move into a topic I think you're gonna find very interesting, but let's stop our sharing here and do one more question. All right, cool. If you have any questions on the last slide too, let me know, but if not, we will do one more polling question for today. Okay, this one now comes from today's lecture on smell, and it has to do with anosmia. So that first slide where we met Carl Wunsch, and it reads like this: anosmia is an ailment in which patients A, have trouble hearing pitches, B, have trouble smelling, C, have trouble tasting, or D, both B and C. You might want to look back at your notes if you're not sure of this one, but hopefully you remember from the earlier lecture. Okay. I'll give you another 30 seconds and we'll talk about it. All right, I think that's good. Looks like most of you answered. Let's go ahead and share the results. And a little more than half of you got this correct. The correct answer is in fact D. So this has nothing to do with music. Hopefully you remember that, right? But there is something, there's a word that kind of sounds like it. So make sure you remember that we're not talking about amusia, we're talking about anosmia, right? Nose is in there. Hopefully that will help you remember it. It's pronounced anosmia, I believe, but that nose, those nose letters are in there. And it does have to do with smelling. And so people that have anosmia do have trouble smelling, certainly. However, as I mentioned when we were discussing this, and Carl, that most often it is discovered because people have trouble tasting as well. And you will learn about taste on Monday and how taste is strongly influenced by smell. But when people have anosmia, they have to flavor their food with salt, flavor their food with spices. So it does affect both smell and taste. And therefore, in this case, the correct answer is D, both B and C. Okay, so the correct answer here is D. Good. Any questions on this? All right, let's continue then and go back to our slides. I think you're going to like this story. Okay, we're going to move from smelling fear to smelling something else that's maybe a little more sophisticated in some ways. Fertility. What does this mean? I was very lucky to interview the person you're seeing here, Martha McClintock. Now, you may have heard of her or heard of her research. It's a really interesting story. This is her senior thesis. So imagine you guys will be doing senior theses, maybe some of you are in psychology majors or other majors. This is hers, and hers not only was published, and not only published in an amazing journal, Nature, but really revolutionized the field of smell perception. And what she pretty much documented was the fact of what's called menstrual entrainment. And maybe you've experienced this, maybe you've heard of this sort of thing before. But the idea here is that women who cohabitate, say in a dorm room, in a suite, okay, in a home, their menstrual cycles tend to kind of sync up. So when they first move in, their menstrual cycles might be at somewhat different times of the month, maybe weeks apart in some cases. But after living together for a few months, 3 or 4 months, they tend to sync up. Now, it's interesting. It's something that, I think anecdotally she had noticed it before, and other of her friends had noticed it before. She ended up noticing it kind of more systematically because she was a work-study student whose work involved actually going to the drugstore every month or every week and buying supplies for her dorm mates, and she realized that it was all around the same time that they needed, the hygiene items, and so she became very aware of this and decided to do her research on it. Now she knew that there was research done on animals where rodents. Female rodents that are cohabitating, their menstrual cycles will entrain. But no one ever really thought that it truly existed, or no one had ever demonstrated that it truly existed in humans, even though anecdotally people would talk about it a little bit. Okay, so what she did was this. She started working on this project, and she said, okay, what I'm going to do is the next freshman class that comes in, I'm going to contact them before they come. She was at Wellesley College, by the way, outside of Boston. I'm going to contact them before they come, and the women that are going to live in this dorm together. Wellesley's an all women's school, by the way. It's one of the 7 sister schools of the Ivy Leagues. It's a great place. I'm going to contact them before they arrive and find out when their periods are. And then I'm going to ask them again after they've lived in the dorm for 4 months and see if their cycles have changed. Okay, so she's going to do this with a questionnaire test, at least on the first pass. She's going to do this with a questionnaire test. And in fact, what she finds is that, yes, without question, women living together, their menstrual cycles did change, so they were synced up with other women they were living with. Okay, it was pretty consistent. It was and these were, big changes too. By a matter of a week or maybe a week and a half, the cycles would shift, so they entrained with each other. Okay, she published this in one of our best journals in science called Nature. You probably have heard of it. And it was very controversial. It was so controversial. She also, by the way, she knew that the rodents and other mammals that showed this behavior, it was known that this was done through the olfactory system. I'm sorry, through the smell system. Olfactory is a fancy word for smell. Through the smell system, she knew that there was some chemical that is being kind of secreted during different times of the month as a female goes through the different phases of the cycle, and that was being detected by the smell systems of other mice, for example. And she thought, well, we know this is happening in mice. This has been proven. If the smell is taken away, if their little mouse noses are plugged, you don't see this sort of entrainment. You don't show this sort of synchrony. It has to do with smell, even if they're not aware of the smell. Right? And that could, in fact, be what's going on with these women who are in training in the dorms. Okay, that could be absolutely what's going on. It was really controversial. People said, we're not smelling anything different. There's no, awareness of these things. Why would we think that humans should be subject to this? Where we know these kind of chemical signals that occur in mice are probably reflexive, right? And in fact, what I just talked about, these kind of chemical signals that cause other animals to have a reflexive kind of scattering if they're scared or something like that. It's called pheromones, right? So these are chemical signals that can signal something like fear, that can signal something like menstrual cycles. And maybe some other things, as we'll soon be talking about. And it can cause other animals, to show these kind of very strong behaviors. Okay. And a lot of folks thought, these kind of chemical signals known as pheromones might be very important for other animals that show these kind of reflexive behaviors, but not for people. People are much more complex than this. They are not subject to the same sort of chemical influences, kind of olfactory or smell chemical influences that, mice and ants and deer are subject to. And so there were criticisms about, well, maybe what's going on, since these experiments are based on self-reports, right? Meaning that the women in the dorm are just reporting when their cycles are. Maybe what their self-reporting is being influenced about when they know their roommate's cycle is, right? So it could be that, people can make mistakes about when their cycle is, if they're doing it retrospectively. I think she actually had them do it as it was happening, but still, there was some suspicion that self-reports aren't the best way to measure this. And there was this other thing, and I think this is worth thinking about. She found that that even though roommates did sync up, often they wouldn't sync up as well as women who were good friends, right? So it's not always the case that your roommate's your best friend when your first year in college, when you first come to college. It's often the case that it's somebody down the hall that you find you have more in common with. And so, that's your friend. You spend time with them, but your roommate, you're being exposed to certainly, during the, entire evening, and, probably part of the morning and the, before you go to sleep as well. So wouldn't the synchrony between women in the same room be closer than the synchrony between women who were friends? And that wasn't necessarily the case. So there was some criticism about that too. She came back with a very, very clever experiment that I think is very compelling evidence that this menstrual entrainment is real, and it's based on something to do with smell. which we will discuss next class. Okay. All right. So have a good weekend, and I will see you folks. Oops, sorry. See you folks. Stop sharing, please. Sorry, I didn't mean to do this. Oh, there we go. Yeah, I'll see you all you folks on Tuesday. All right, bye-bye.